Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Nikki McCormack. Nikki, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for hopping on. So I've seen your books for a while, in our different groups and things like that. So I was glad, that I could message you and we could get this set up. And then my son did make it easy, so I'm glad that I could get you and a couple other people on. Still, this part, particularly for season 4, in terms of like your release and everything. So that just worked out really well. So it was pretty quick, I feel like, compared to sometimes how I how long it takes when he decides that it's not going to happen for some people at the time that it should. So, yeah, so I'm glad that we could rearrange this and get you on when we wanted to. So that feels actually really good. So thank you so much for coming on today and chit chat with me about your novels and, your writing experience. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm,
for sure.
I'm excited.
Yeah, let's do this thing. So we'll actually get right in there. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
So I actually started writing when I was 11. I was an avid reader thanks to my mom. And I had read this book called Birth of the Firebringer, which was a fantasy novel with talking unicorns, naturally.
Nice.
And it inspired me to start writing my own book. So I told my teacher at the time that I was going to be an author when I grew up. Um, and I started writing my first book, and it's really horrible, but I still have it. I had space talking unicorns and aliens, and it was wonderful. But yeah, that was kind of where it all started. And I never stopped writing, but I kind of did the thing where everyone tells you to get a real job and tried to work out careers and things like that. But in 2007, I had a two-part story accepted by Cricket Magazine,
Oh, cool.
and that was kind of it was just some motivation I needed to get back into it again. And I had another short story a few years later make finalist in the Writers of the Future contest,
Oh, cool.
and again kept the madness going. So from there, I still kind of focused more on my day job, which was also actually writing, doing technical writing and such. But I never stopped writing books. Um, and in 2012, I actually got an agent for my debut novel, which was The Girl in the Clockwork Cat. But and so through that process, I got published with Entangled Teen.
Hmm.
So I got to go through that whole process, and it was very validating.
Yeah.
But it ultimately didn't feel like a great fit for me with that publisher. So through a little bit of chaos and stuff, I ended up buying rights to the book back, and from there I began my self-publishing journey, which I think we're 17 books into that now. So but yeah, it's been kind of, I think in some ways, a fairly typical journey, because we all have that little voice in our head that says we should be doing something, doing a real job.
Yeah.
But I've never given up on it, and I did set it aside as my hobby for a long time, but I've been trying to take it a lot more seriously in the last several years. But
Think we can all feel the real job part.
yeah, yeah,
It's
definitely.
so funny. Like there's like so many times where I like as a teacher have not said get a real job. Like I've said
Yeah.
so many times like get because I thoroughly love teaching. Like don't get me wrong. Like I actually I know a lot of people I hate a lot of things I have to do for it. I don't think are very helpful, but I do really enjoy it. So I'm lucky where I actually love what I do. And honestly, it's probably what's been hard with my new school is like I love what I do. I love the people I work with. It's just a good time. It scratches a lot of itches that I need. I'm at a new program, but I still have to write if that makes sense. But I think I need to start creating for myself like more of a like I did in the past where it was like more of an urgency, if
Yeah.
that makes sense, because I'm just having such a good time. There's just not an urgency now. Like I used to do it because I didn't like a lot of parts of my job, or people I had to work with or something like that. Now it's the opposite. So, but I'm still like, no, I have to do this thing because I've done all this work and I want people, to write. But I'm always glad when I hear people, say like, yeah, my teacher helped me or this or that. And but sometimes I get people on here, they're like, yeah, my teacher told me I would never write a book or whatever. I'm like, no, like those people are awful. They shouldn't.
Oh, I
Uh,
actually had a algebra teacher in school who he came up behind me one day. I was writing my book in class, in math class, so he knew I wasn't doing math. And he asked me if I was writing letters, and I told him no, I was writing a book. And he stood over my shoulder and read for a minute, and then he was like, "That's really cool," and he let me do it. And I almost flunked that class because I kept writing books after that. But it did, it was just that little thing, those little nudges along the way that keep you going. But but yeah, probably not a good thing to do in algebra class.
I've said many a time I've had I had one girl I remember particularly who was so good at poetry. I'm like, but she was like, "Oh, I want to be a mechanic." I'm like, "Fine, be a mechanic." I'm like, "But you really need to continue to write poetry."
Right.
And I mean, she was like one of the best I've ever seen. I was just like, "You're really, really good at this." And she had a lot of experiences a lot of people shouldn't have and don't have, but should have in their lives, particularly as kids. But I'm like, she turned it into just raw emotion and like the words that she was able to use. So, but yeah, it always makes me feel good when people are encouraging or don't say the get a day job thing. I always think of the Jim Carrey quote about his dad, where his dad he wanted to be a comedian, and he's like, my dad probably could have been a really good one, and instead he became an accountant because it wasn't a safe job. And then when he was 11, they became really, really poor and had to do like whatever they had to do to survive. So that like
Mhm.
inspired him to go after his dreams, which I think is a really great lesson for anybody to learn. I think at this point too, in the day in the world, like you're going to struggle no matter what you do, for the most
Yeah.
part. Might as well do what you love, and that's coming right from Jim Carrey. But yeah, that's really cool. I just think that's a good lesson to learn, though. You said, like just keep writing. I think that's always the thing that keeps me in my mind. Like it's not an award, it's not money, it's whatever. It's just keep writing is like the main thing.
Yeah.
If people keep watching these interviews, that's the same thing that everybody always says. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, that's the theme to get anything out there. Whether you have an agent, indie, traditional, whatever, that always seems to be the mantra of everybody. So I just think it's a good thing to point out for our viewers and listeners that just keep writing. You can't get anything out
Yes.
there unless you keep writing.
Yes.
And that is me in draft 5 of my novella right now. I feel like Bruce Willis crawling through the air duct with like a little flame on the lighter. I'm like, where am I going? What am I doing? I should just go back and hang out at the Christmas party or something. But I just keep writing. But I think that's a good goal for anybody to have. So that's really cool. I'm glad you said that. Well, that's cool. You had some different experiences right there. I think that right kind of help you now to make different decisions for yourself, which I think is really good. And yeah, I know a lot of people, particularly at that time, who maybe were with presses or with companies that weren't exactly the right fit, but I think that was smart on your part for recognizing that, and then doing what you can to get those rights back. So I think that's also a really good lesson to be learned too, just to make sure that even I know I've had traditional published people on here, quite a few, and some bigger
Yeah.
or, and some of them privately have literally said to me like, maybe I should have gone indie, and it's all bedazzled, and it's not quite, particularly in traditional published realm. And it's interesting, like Kevin J. Anderson, if you ever listen, anybody ever listens to him on the Wizards, Warriors, and Words, or Lindsay Broker's podcast, and Joe Lalo back in the day, like he's been saying that for a while. We're talking about a Star Wars writer, author who had like some of the greatest Star Wars classics of all
Yeah.
time. And he's still saying like, yeah, hybrid's the way of the future. Like Brandon Sanderson, really has it where it's at. He said that for the last 7 years and has tried to tailor his stuff, the Brandon Sanderson route. So I think it's interesting, whenever somebody comes on to kind of see what their experience has been. And to kind of help us make those choices too when those opportunities pop up. So I think that's a good thing to learn is make sure it's the right fit. So and that's always something someone says to me is like when they weren't happy with it, like really just wasn't the right fit. So I think that's something to be said, right? That it wasn't necessarily your writing or
Yeah.
It's just those other aspects. So I think that's also a good thing to point out, for people in our audience. So I'm just curious,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead, go right ahead.
I was just gonna say that I do feel like it's so easy to get completely just starstruck by the whole
Oh,
traditional publishing
yeah.
process, and finding that right fit, I think, is really important. But when I did it, I was just so excited that my dream had come true that I didn't really look at any of that, and I don't regret it necessarily. It was a great learning process, but I feel like, if you do go the traditional route, make sure that the agent and the publisher are a good fit, because it can lead to chaos later if it really feels like it's not working. And for me, I feel like it all worked out in the long run, but it was a little heartbreaking at one point where I felt like it just had fallen apart. I'd gotten my dream, and it wasn't really going the way I envisioned. And so I think it's good to go in eyes wide open.
No, I totally agree. And I'm going to mention somebody who I've had on a couple times, and I know he's not shy about his process, like what happened. So if you look at like Michael R. Fletcher with, I don't know why I'm blanking right now, Road to Redemption, and he had gotten that book, they had asked for a book two, and then it just it was really well received by readers, but not necessarily reviewers. And then they decided to pull book two, and he just now has earned out his, his advance or whatever. I know he
Yeah.
got the rights back, but yeah, like that's one in particular, that I can think of that just was, and I bought that one. I cannot wait to start that one actually in the new year. It's been on my list for a while. It's a little bit bigger than what I was trying to do recently, but I think I just need some different stuff. And it's one that I bet has been on my bucket list for a while for him. But I think that's a great example. Like Rob J. Hayes is another one. He's not shy about, what his issues were. But I do want to point out, that even though they had issues, or, maybe you felt like it wasn't going to fit, sometimes, you do find a really good fit. So I think it is, right?
Yeah.
You have to talk to people that I think that's wise to have a community of people. Like if someone comes up to me at some point, it's like, hey, this or that, like I'm going to go to R.R. Verdi, AJ M. Gibson, like Logan D. Irons, H.L. Tinsley, I'll go to Sarah Chorn, and I'll be like, hey, what do you guys think? Along with my friend who's my, attorney and lawyer, and see if those are the kind of things, not just legally, but other things too, right? That, make sense. I have some agent
Yeah.
friends, as well. So I think it's always good to just be mindful, that people have had issues in the past, and not necessarily that a company's out to get you and is evil, but just that
No.
not just be the right fit. And I think that's totally fine for both people to say. Companies say it to us all the time, as authors or writers or creatives. So I think it's totally fine for us to say the same thing, and just do what's
Yeah.
best. So I think that's wise advice, Nikki. So that's a good. So we'll move on there. So this is always one of my favorite ones to ask people. What genre or genres do you currently write in, and why?
Um, my debut was steampunk young adult, kind of alternate history. But most of my work is epic fantasy. I do both YA and adult epic fantasy. And as to the YA, I mean, it's what I've always loved to read the most. I love exploring other worlds that people come up with. I love the unique magic systems, the world building, seeing how characters in a world completely different from ours are still, in some ways so much the same, and yet in
Yeah.
other ways different. Um, but I do try periodically to write like urban fantasy or something, but I would really rather just make up my entire world, and the creatures in it and the magic system and all of that. So that tends to be what I lean toward. I don't really do, I mean, I have a little bit of romance in many of my books, but I'm not really a romantasy writer. I like kind of gritty, more realistic uh, fiction with, sometimes I'll pull in real world things like a little bit of racism or war or politics, things that make the world feel real, and help, navigate those issues, partially just for my own benefit to help me, get through them in my real world.
Yeah, no, for sure, for
But
sure.
yeah, and I just love that ability to create a whole world and invite people to come share it and bring their imagination along and have fun, so.
Oh, I actually was right before. This is so funny. There was a mom that, had like a meme on Instagram, and I follow her account. She's like a fitness guru. Amazing workouts, by the way. If anybody wants them, let me know. But yeah, and she was like, oh, it was so funny. It was like a meme, and she was like, when you're staring at your husband in the middle of the night because his like he can't breastfeed or whatever. And I was just like, oh my God. I was like, I have no idea on that aspect, but like just to try and help my wife was just, I mean, it was just, my son was just hungry. Like he was hangry all the time. And I would have to like wake up with them to then just be okay, like let's go, and I said that I was like, oh man, I was like, I feel you. I was like, I can't do that. I go, but I was really trying to do whatever I could to help my wife and my son out because he then was hungry. So then I'd have to like give him another bottle or or whatever, and I was trying to let her sleep, and I would walk around the house from like 1:30 to 3:30 playing Raffi Baby Beluga. That song, guys, is only 2 minutes and 23 seconds long. Imagine how many times you got to play that in a 2 hour gap. But that was fine, right? I'm like, did what I did, try and help both of them out. And this guy gets on there and like calls me just a name. And I'm like, oh, okay. So in my head, I'm like, he's going to be one of the characters in my new book that one of the women in particular does something really not nice towards because I'm just like, seriously? So like that type of misogyny, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like, sweet. It's on my podcast account, so I try and be professional with it. But in my head, I'm thinking like, all right. So I have these two characters, and I was like, at some point they're gonna run up against this misogynistic guy, whether it's a small character or whatever. And I'm like, I get you, because there's things like that where I'm just like, fantasy worlds are fun, dude. So yeah, so I definitely cannot wait to write that scene. Maybe it's an inn and somebody thinks they're not supposed to be, and the two
Right.
of them strong female characters, and I cannot wait to see what happens to this guy. So I think in the future he'll be a lot nicer to them in the world in particular. So I feel yeah, it is fun. I think in a fantasy world to be able to do that. Urban fantasy I'm writing right now is my slog. My friend's like, "Why did you decide to publish these first?" I'm like, "Because they're harder for me. Fantasy is so much easier to write. I'm a historian. I teach history. It's like knowing societies, culture, structures, religions, all those things. Like yesterday, I literally did a D&D adventuring party, like outline story for a book within, I think it was like 2 hours. And I'm actually really excited for where it's going. Now, my urban fantasy has taken me a lot longer because it's real life, and I have to account for things like guns or whatever, and I don't really know. So
Yeah.
I've had a lot of learning. My guy's a veteran. I had to learn a lot of things about the military. So it's taken me a lot longer. So I totally agree. Like for me, it's like fantasy is like slipping on a glove or like, like just hanging out with an old friend, it just fits really well. I used to be really into sci-fi, but I think it's like sci-fi fantasy, I think is more, like Star Wars, but I think that is a little bit easier than like, traditional sci-fi. It was just reading Andy Weir, and I'm like, I can't do that science. Like, I want to do it. So I definitely agree with you. Like
Yeah.
fantasy is my sweet spot for reading and writing because I like to just escape, and just have a good time. But I do like to see some of those real world elements, but I also like to see how
Oh, yeah.
people, incorporate them into their own, setting and, their characters, their own unique problems. Like you said, having talking unicorns with aliens, like that presents a lot of unique problems. Also,
Right.
opportunity to see how our real world things would interact with them and how they would with interact in kind with those different things. So I think that just sounds really cool. So I'm right there with you. Fantasy is definitely my baby, definitely my favorite child as of right now. So maybe one of these days I'll switch to something else. But I got to say though, I still want to see the talking unicorns with aliens. Like
Maybe I'll
so,
go back there someday.
I'm just saying, like I think when people look in the drawer for a long time, and I have several. I understand. I had one the other day. My mom's like, "Do you want this?" I guess it was like back in the summer. I'm like, "No, no, no." She goes, "Do you want me to keep it or throw it?" I'm like, "Well, keep it." I'm like,
Keep
and we'll
it. Yeah.
scan it. Maybe there's something good out. I go, I can't even like. I was in the process of editing, which I still am, and I was like, I just don't even want to look at that thing, But it's interesting to
Right.
see how some people, are able to harvest, even if it's like a world or an idea, or something from that. But I just have to just point that out there that talking unicorns and aliens sounds absolutely amazing. So I would definitely read a book that has those. So, and I think a lot of
Okay.
people out there listening are nodding their heads yes as well. Um, so this is like going to be one of my favorite couple sets of questions here, or just talking in general, just about your books. So we'll go with that third one. What are your Silver Blood Ravens books about, and how'd you come up with this idea?
Well, so this is kind of born from one of the things I do a lot to keep from, if I work on my books in my head when I'm falling asleep, then I don't ever sleep. So
That's
I will take other people's worlds and tell myself fan fiction in them, and I'll create my own character to insert. And that's part of how I help myself go to sleep at night and shut up my book brain.
a good idea.
Every now and then I'll come up with a character that I love so much that I want to find my own world to put them in. And Raven was one of those characters that I had inserted into another fantasy world. But I really fell in love with the character. And so I kind of kept her in my head until I had this idea that was oddly kind of born of the pandemic. Because one of the big things about her character is that she was raised in isolation. And, the whole isolation of the pandemic kind of got me thinking of what it would be like if you had been that way your whole life and were now trying to integrate into society. So that was a little bit of what inspired it. But she's a skilled hunter, a skilled fighter, but she's half elven, which this world has a bit of racism in that respect. So she gets issues from both sides for being half. But she also has a magic in her that she didn't choose, but in the world outside of her isolation, that magic is controlled by a group called the Silver Blood Brotherhood, who do not allow anyone else to have it, and have kind of gotten the laws of the country to support them in making anyone who uses that magic outside of the Brotherhood basically evil and punishable by death. So she's hiding because of her race and also because of her magic. And the magic itself changes your appearance a little bit. So she has silver eyes, so she can't pretend
Cool.
she's not, you know.
Yeah.
um so but then the warrior who trained her and who has been caring for her is murdered and their house is burnt down. So she's kind of forced out, and she decides to try and go after the people who killed them. But you have all these wonderful complications in that because she has severe social anxiety. She's never interacted with anyone outside of, the person who raised her. So she has that anxiety. And like I said, as a warrior and hunter, she's very capable, but outside of that, she really doesn't know how to survive in the world. And she doesn't know who might turn her in for having the magic and things like that. So it was really, really fun to experiment with her character and bring her out into the
Yeah.
world and deal with the kind of people she's meeting and trying to overcome her own personal fears, of speaking to that first stranger and things like that. Um, but yeah, so her journey kind of starts off when she loses the man who raised her and her home, and doesn't know what else to do. So she decides to try and go after his killers. But she does lose the path at some point. And so we kind of take a turn off to the side. And she also runs into a man from the Silver Blood Brotherhood. But beyond that, we won't go too much into it because I don't want to give too many spoilers. But it was actually a really fun book to write because I got to really explore this process of the character discovering how to integrate with society and deal with her fears and deal with prejudice and all of those things. So it was an interesting book to write in that respect.
No, it sounds cool. It sounds like a fantasy version of Hannah, right? Where like her dad's taking her, but she has the skills to survive, right? And she's really good at that, but she has to figure out how to interact. So I love that. I think so I think you set yourself up really perfectly as a writer for, you know, so many challenges, right? Like you have a character that has this skill set, but then doesn't really have any skills over here. And I think that sets you up for a lot of very, very interesting writing along the way. So I think that was really well done. So that sounds really cool. And I also like how you said that she, she has the eyes and stuff, so she can't hide, who she
Yeah.
is. And I think that's always a good one too, right? Is having, take that away from a character, and then you might be able to hide out in the woods or somewhere else, right? But when you have to actually interact with people, that ends up causing a lot of fun problems for an author to write
Yeah.
about, solve. So yeah, that's super cool. Um, I'm just curious as to were there other characters? So it sounds like you do this quite a bit. Were there other characters that you've done this with as well? Or was she really just the one in particular that stuck out to you? Or have you continued to kind of use that process to add other characters, whether it's to these books or maybe some of your other ones? I don't know. I just think that's a cool process. I think we're all sitting there at night trying to turn the writer brain off, particularly when you're writing right before bed. So I'm just kind of curious about that.
Um, Mostly she's one of two that have worked out that way. I had another one, the character is called the Keeper. And I put her in another world and was telling myself this extended story with her in that world. And another of those characters that I really just fell in love with. And she's kind of she's a living person, but she's got this parasitic creature living inside her that collects the souls of gods and demons.
Oh, cool.
And the and I came up with the world to put her in, and the book's actually called The Keeper, but it's basically a standalone.
Mm.
But yeah, she's the only other character I've actually pulled out and put into their own world. But it does happen occasionally.
Yeah. Well,
But
that's cool.
that story has a little bit of inspiration in like Japanese anime and the kind of wide world of demons and gods that they use for the animes and stuff like that. So
Oh, that's really neat. I'm just curious because like that's like my friend asked me the other day. I like I said, I'm doing like a new, I always call them my warm-up stories. So I just like stuff that's just kind of fun. I'm not really super invested in, just to kind of just warm up the writing engine, particularly on a long week like this one. It's only Monday and I have the day off. On the weekend, I knew I had to preheat at this point in the year, like the time change has always just like slows me down, and then I knew my allergies were going to kick in. So I was like, oh, I had one that turned into an actual like novel that I'm going to finish up. But usually they don't. Usually I'm just like, I just have cool characters. Maybe I can mine from them. But this was like my second one that I'm like, oh, right away. I'm like, yep. So it's funny that you said two. I have two that are turning my friend goes, I think it's because you're getting better at writing. So you're getting better at writing the characters, the synopsis, and goes, it just sounds interesting. I have like the two separate fantasy worlds or universes, and one I'll just have over here in case people are like, hey, Dan, here's a good deal. And it sounds really, like maybe I do like, and it's a good fit, to go traditional. That my other stuff is like, let baby that. Nobody can, don't want anybody to have rights or anything to anything in it at all. So if anybody in Hollywood wants to come see me, you can go on this side. You can take this side, no matter what. So, but I totally get it. Like but it's always interesting, right? When you're just doing something with a process like that, and then all of a sudden it becomes a thing. It's just like I always think really cool. But I think that also I've talked to a lot of authors and writers. I think that's when that you have a really good character or a really good story or a really good world or magic ability or or a problem, like whatever it is, right? Those are the stories that need to be told for whatever reason. So I think that's just really cool that that's your process, for these two characters in particular. So that's really neat. And I know we're running a little out of time, so I want to make sure we're kind of staying scheduled just so we can talk about your other book series as well. So for that next one, so what are your Clockwork Enterprise and the Forbidden Things series about, and how did these ideas or series come about?
well, the Clockwork Enterprise series, that was my debut. The Girl and the Clockwork Cat was the one that I got my agent and publisher with, but that one was a log because I went to a writers conference, which I've gone to a lot of them, but at this particular one, the agents and publishers were very excited about steampunk. And I wasn't planning to write a steampunk novel, but as I had been before the conference, I had been to this steampunk conference or con where they had all sorts of, cool steampunk art and music
Yeah.
and stuff. So I had been kind of getting into it already, and then they were talking about it, and I'm like, huh, how would I go about that? And the and so it was kind of entertaining because I started chatting with my mom about it because I brainstorm book stuff with her a lot. And I came up with this idea for this clockwork cat, which eventually transformed into a cat with a clockwork leg. But and it just burst to life. And I came up with this main character who was a young half Japanese girl living on the streets of London, trying to survive as a pickpocket. And it starts off with basically a heist gone wrong. And when she's running from the law enforcement, she hides and comes across this cat with a clockwork leg. And she, thinks opportunity, I can get a reward for this. And she finds the address etched on the inside of a panel on the leg, tries to take it back, and finds that the family's been murdered, and becomes kind of a good scapegoat for the
Mm,
murder. Um, and so she gets embroiled in this mystery, trying to find, who killed these people, and, racing through the streets of London with this cat who kind of becomes her companion. And she was one of those characters who just, like, she grabbed me by the throat and took me along with her. And I wrote the first draft in 22 days. And
wow.
um, and it was definitely a high-paced, fun book. It was the first real YA book I ever wrote. But it was just really a whole lot of fun, and it apparently fit what the agents were looking for at the time. So it worked out pretty well. But yeah, I had a good time with that one. It was interesting because I do a ton of research for my fantasy, everything from, looking at historical wars and things like that, to dealing with injuries and everything. But with this one, of course, I wanted to do an alternate history that
Mm,
still
yeah.
fit in with real London history, but had its little divergences. So I did so much research on, like, the language, on Cockney rhyming slang. That was fun. Just so much research on all these little elements so that it would feel like it took place in real London. And then I, wove in the steampunk elements to give it, kind of this alternate history life of its own. But it was definitely a lot of fun to write. It's, again, I don't normally write real world stuff, but that one was pretty fun. Um,
That's cool.
and then, I completed that series on my own. The agent actually, or the publisher, was actually willing to take the second book, but whether it was a good idea at the time or not, I felt like it wasn't the right choice. So yeah, we took it on our own. But and then the Forbidden Things book it was it was kind of or that trilogy anyway. That was kind of, I wrote that in a pretty short period of time, but I was working as a technical writer at the time. And so I had to do like a million edits on that thing to make it sound like a emotional story instead of a tech manual. But that book actually started with a dream I had. And it was kind of interesting because I had this dream about this character being, pulled into this almost interplanetary dungeon type thing. And she meets this other character who's trying to escape that place. But she, in at least in the dream, and then I woke up with this character in my head and this world in my head, and her past and her story, and it just blew up from there. But she's living in a world where she has a pretty strong magic in her, but her society, channels you into being healers because they don't trust the magic. But she encounters a man from another country who is trying to fight a war, and in their country that magic is developed for a lot of different things. And
Mm,
so her father was put to death for treason, so she's been trying to lay low and not draw attention in her country. But this man she meets, she decides to help him, and it kind of helps her start seeing the more potential in her own magic and what she might be able to do if she wasn't being constrained by her country. And it kind of course, grows from there. But the man she meets is waging a war against his his ruler, I guess. So yeah, there's a lot of war and politics in that one, and a little overarching romance, plot. But yeah, it was, for a long time, it was my favorite series I had ever written. It's actually been beat now, but
Well, that sounds cool. I'm just curious, like when you said like, for like Mako in particular, like I'm curious, like what stuck out for her, so much that you were like, oh, I gotta write this, and you just like plowed through in 22 days. I'm just curious, like what was it about that character and her story? Like, did you have to see her through? You're like, oh, this isn't fair that she's being blamed for this crime that she didn't commit. Like, was it that, or was it just like something about her personality? I'm just kind of curious at what stuck out about her character in particular, that you were like, I just gotta go. Like, I'm curious about that.
um with her, it was a lot. She was this very, spunky, energetic, determined character, and the stuff she was facing, was, I mean, I guess kind of unfair that she was being put in this position, but for the most part, she was just so fun to write. She was very spirited and determined and unwilling to be defeated, and raced along, and I just went with her. And I had a similar experience with my more recent series. Every now and then you just get that character who
Yep.
is so compelling and so full of life that you can't help going with them and finding out, where this is going to lead. I mean, it was just really fun going on the adventure with her.
Oh, it's cool. It's always cool when you can find a character that like you have to find out what happens, even if you have to find the details. I like to use the beginning and end, right? It's like, and then I put like way markers as or waypoints as one author. I forget which one. I was listening to a podcast. I was like, oh, I kind of like that. I think it was someone on Herman Stewart Angle's The Greatest Podcast in the Multiverse. So you guys should definitely check that out. It was someone he was talking to. He's like, yeah, I do like waypoints. I'm like, that's a great way to put it. But it's nice when they can lead you through those, right? Because there's different points where you're like, oh, I know that this is going to happen and this is going to happen, but how we get there is, I like that discovery piece still. And I think it's always fun to go with the character. I think that ends up just making a better character and just a better story. So I think that's really cool. Those are the kind of characters that people like, we really strive to get every time, right? But you don't, right? Some characters like
Yeah.
mine, she decides that she's in the book. I'm like, to hell, you're not in this book. Like, you're in this book. And then come to find out she wasn't in that book. And then the guy she was with, he was like, I'm with her, but I'm in this book. I'm not in this book. And I'm like, you two suck. So then I had to like figure. But then the two new characters I had were definitely a much better fit. And I was like, I got to figure out what to do with these other two at some point. But yeah, so they're not always that fun or enjoyable, right off the bat, or to try and figure out those spots. So jealous about Mako there. So that's really cool. I have to say though, just going back to like just like Indigo, like that's just a really cool concept, I think, is like that her country is like focused on healing, but then she wants to do something else with this power. So I think that, I don't know, it's just like a really cool like yin and yang aspect about um I don't know, that I think that you just have so many cool concepts there of things that you could talk about, like themes you could go into. I don't know, I've seen people like do it the other way, where there's like destroying and then they try to heal, but not that way. So that's actually really interesting. And I think you posed a really compelling argument there, on like the morality of a power like that and when it should be used, and should it be used for violence to fight, even if it is something good, right? Or should she, is her country right about using it to heal? So I'm just kind of curious at how you came up with that type of theme or question, just in terms of the world building or her country just in general. That's super cool.
Yeah, I with her, I think a lot of it was kind of wanting to explore that theme of, you have this country that's it's trying to control it because to some degree it's a fear thing, but
Hmm.
you have another country across the Gilded Strait that is using it for everything. They're using it to help with
Hmm.
construction, they're using it for war, they're using it for, all kinds of things. So they've completely embraced it, but then you have the dark side of that, which is the fact that they use it as a weapon. Um, so yeah, I love I love taking things like that and having to explore that complicated issue of like, is it right to use it as a weapon? And if it is, how much? And also, like I said, they also use it to help with things like construction. So it has very practical uses too. So it kind of adds a deeper layer when you get to have those really complicated questions to approach and dig through in the under, you've got this character story, but underneath it you have all that world stuff that's deeper and more complicated, and you can dig into it through the eyes of that character and their experience. And I really love doing that kind of thing. My newest one, I have a similar magical morality question that I explore a lot, and that doesn't really have an easy answer. And it's that kind of stuff really gets my brain going, I guess.
No, totally. I totally get that. I have like I had like a beast ride, like a beast master type of like society, and I was like, well, I want them just to be really good at using their type of magic for beast handling. And essentially like they're in the mountains, so they have like griffins, right? So they've figured out how to use their magic for that, but they don't have any like destructive magic or anything. And then at another country to the south of them that's kind of similar, right? I'm like, well, what if they had use of destructive magic or elemental magic, particularly like fire, right? But they, and then what happens if a third empire comes in? It's like kind of pushing them underneath and then forces those two to fight each other. But then what happens if these two people realize from opposite sides, like, hey, if we actually join together, we could actually be really more powerful than this empire in the south. And that's where my Griffin Core series is going to come in, where you're going to figure out how the Griffin Core was actually established. So, but it's like cool with world building, I think, to see like those kind of aspects, right? Is like, I end up coming up with that question. It's like, I have to answer this question now. And then I have cool characters along the way to do it. So I think that's what makes fantasy in particular for me really fun. So I totally get you there. It's always fun to see like the what ifs, in particular,
Yeah.
because then there's all these other things that come from it, right? It's like a web, and all of a sudden you just end up having a really unique story. So I think that's really cool. Um, and I was gonna say, for the next one, this has got to be one of my favorites. Just like I love the cover of book one in particular. Um, I just thought it was really cool. So, what is your Warden's Son series about, and how did you come up with the idea for this series?
This one is my new favorite, which I think part of that is just growing and learning it as a writer, but another part
Yeah,
of
for
it
sure.
is the second character I've ever had that just really took hold of me and drug me along. And I wrote the 4 book series, the first draft of all 4 books in 5 months, and it was
Wow.
crazy. It was a wild ride, but
My character's got to get going, man. They got to start dragging me. That's Come on, guys. Yell at them later. I'm gonna line them up in a row and yell at
just
them and be
go.
like, "Drag
Just go. um, but yeah, that doesn't happen very often. But when it does, I mean, I love it. But I mean, people who actually want to talk to me about other things don't, but I do. Um, but yeah, this one came, and oddly, it was inspired by a character's backstory that I created for a D&D campaign.
Oh,
Um,
awesome.
but it diverged pretty dramatically. but the character is basically he is a child of the enemy country being raised secretly. And the man who's raising him found him as an infant or really young with his pointed ears cut off because they're an elven-like race. They're not elves typically, but the southern kingdoms are at war with the kingdom he was born in, and he's grown up hiding what he is and believing that and seeing his own people that he was born to as the enemy. But he one of the fun things about this series is it explores one of those things where the kingdom he came from is the only one that has magic. And
Oh, cool.
they came to this country or to this continent later and took over the northern portion of the continent. And when they ran into the southern kingdoms, it wasn't so bad. They were, doing okay until the southern kingdoms found out they had magic. And their magic is all psychic. There's no, fire or lightning or things like that. It's all things like mind control and charming people and stuff like that. So inevitably the trust broke down between the southern kingdoms and the one kingdom that have magic, and they've been at war since then. So he grows up kind of viewing his own people as the enemy, and he's living in secret, kind of hiding what he is until some mercenaries come to their village hunting for him. And then he discovers that there's a whole lot more to all of this than he realized, and that the man who raised him has been keeping some pretty dramatic secrets from him. And when the mercenaries get a hold of him, he's rescued by people from his own country who want to take him back. So he has, these huge questions about, do I go back with these people to live with the enemy in a country I don't even know the language or anything? Do I stay here and try and, be with the family that I grew up with? And so you have his personal journey and a lot of really crushing emotional stuff in there. And one of the people who comes from the other country is supposedly his Tanakh, which is a spirit brother, which is something they practice regularly up there. Everyone has someone in their life who is basically their spirit sibling to support them as they grow up and learn with them and all of that.
Oh, cool.
So, but you have his personal journey, but then you also have this war and this question of how is it possible for these southern kingdoms to trust these people, knowing that they can do things like charm them and cause them to see things that aren't there and things like that. And so that aspect of it was really fun to explore too. And they have, and they can also control the mind of beasts, which made me think of, when you were talking about your griffins and stuff, I was like, oh, hey, yeah.
That's really cool.
Because beasts. So yeah, you have all of these interesting elements of the different cultures trying to find some balance on this continent. But when your opponent can control your mind, it's really hard to trust them. So yeah, and his journey was so much fun, and how he grew and made mistakes along the way, but always determined to try and protect the people he loves. And I had a fantastic time just going through this process with this character and, trying to figure out who he was supposed to be and who he actually wants to be, and discovering that he might actually have some of those powers himself and everything. But yeah, I had a fabulous time with this series.
That sounds awesome. Clearly, because again, if you're going through that quick, with the ideas and able to, just figure out, I think that's always the hardest thing, right? It's like, even if you have different events, I think it's always hard to figure out like the why of a character, right? Or what their development's going to be. I think that's been something I've been working on personally, like at the start of a story more, the outline. to try and, determine those kind of things. Because I think then it allows you to have more growth later, right? But some characters do just really tell you exactly who they are. And it's always
Yeah.
fun when do that. I have one character, he's like, I'm just a piece of garbage. And I'm like, you really are. And like, it's kind of like a thing where he like goes to see his friends and then realizes like, oh, there's this ruin in the middle of town. I'm gonna go down there and steal the thing. I hear how everybody's talking about these things, and then he goes down and releases like these zombies and demons, and then his friends or his two veteran friends are from the army are basically like, okay, now we gotta like go and stop this. And he's like, no, I'm good. They're like, no, and then they like basically kidnap him and bring him with them. And they're like, yeah, no, you're gonna help us like stop this. So, but yeah, he's told me he's like, I'm just a piece of garbage, but in the story, right? Like he has certain growth, and it just makes it really fun, I think, right, to show that. And he maybe will take some a little bit of responsibility at some point, and not be so crappy. But he told me, he goes, I'm a piece of garbage. So he's actually fun just from that aspect because I'm like, you really are. He's like, I told you, and I think it's always fun, when characters like that. Some, right, make you, they're like real people, right? Which I think is good, but like sometimes it's like they won't open up to you right away, right? Or you're like writing and you're like, you stop, you're like, I didn't know that about you. And they're like, I don't like to talk to people, it's like real people. So I think it's funny to, kind of see them, as my friend would say, like come to life on the page or through the process. So if they're more real for you, right, they'll be more real for our characters,
Yeah.
for readers. There's a couple people that are watching the last several episodes of this being like, Dan's crazy. But if you're I think it was Jeff L. Cahonik, Jeffrey said, if you're not a writer or an author, you don't get it. But if you are, you will. Like that's how the process is for quite a few of us. So I think that's really cool. But I'm gonna be really mean now, Nikki. I'm gonna make you pick your favorite child. So when it comes to characters, which ones, see, I was nice there instead of saying one, but which ones have you written are your favorites and why?
Um, well, truly for a really long time, Indigo was my favorite because of her journey and her character arc and everything were something I was so proud of. And in some odd ways, she paralleled a little bit of my life at the time in a much more dramatic and exciting way, mind you. But but so she was a very personal character to me. But I'm afraid that Casil, the main character in The Warden's Son, has kind of earned a higher place in my heart because I I just fell in love with his character. He's so vulnerable and a little bit naive in the beginning, and going through this journey, this 4-book series with him, and as the character learns and grows and yet still maintains some of who he really is throughout the whole thing. Um, I loved his story. I just really loved going through it with him, watching him make his mistakes, and try to do better. And he was such a great character. And a lot of people have commented on really loving the character in reviews and stuff. So that's makes me so happy. Um, but yeah, so Indigo is still very dear to me. But yeah, I think Casil's my current favorite child.
That's cool. She'll be talking to you later, being like, I have this next series where I'm now your favorite. So that's really awesome. Well, this actually leads me right into our seventh question, which is, what is the one thing you are most proud of when it comes to your own writing and why?
Um, Probably just the fact that I continue to grow as a writer. I mean, I think all through my life, I've read books on writing, gone to conferences, done everything I could to keep developing my skill as a writer. And I feel like, each book that comes out is a reflection of learning more and doing more. And, I truly feel like the best written series I've done is the most recent one. Because I just keep learning and trying to build upon what I know already. I've always felt very strongly that the true, you know, goal of a book is a collaboration between the author and the reader, bringing your imaginations together, because that's when it really comes to life. And
Yeah, yeah.
and I just try very hard to make sure that I'm doing the best I can to put out there to readers and say, this is worth your time and money, and actually feel like that's true. Um, so yeah, I think, just growing and seeing that growth on the page, when I go to edit, each time I make a new book, I see fewer things that are wrong with it when I start my editing process, and that feels really great. Or when I give it to my final editor, I always get comments about how little they have to do, and I'm like,
That's
great,
awesome.
can I pay you this?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
That's
no,
awesome.
but yeah, I think just watching that growth and being able to see it in my own writing has been really rewarding.
Oh, that's super cool. It's a great answer, by the way. I like that. Well, I can tell you what I'm excited about. I'm excited for your characters and world building. This sounds so interesting in each series. So I think that's like definitely, I have like the Warden's son. I have them all, so I'm really excited to read those. But it's always funny because like I'll start a book or I'll start a series and then authors will be like, I want you to read it before you interview me. But for me as a writer and a reader, I always enjoy it more after I've had these conversations. And I know that's different from a lot of people, but I just get more out of it because I'll be like, oh, I can totally see what Nikki was saying there. I, can see this, and because I am a writer, I do like that director's cut ahead of time. I know more what to expect, and and some people privately like tell me things are going to happen, but it's like I don't care because it's like you can tell me the destinations you went to, but it's about that journey that your character takes along the way, right? Plus, I talk to so many authors, I will forget tomorrow anyway, unless I go back once I talk to next set of authors. But yeah, but those are I would say those are the two things I'm most excited about for that series. And just your writing in general. So that's really really cool. It's kind of like a preview trailer of of your writing. So I think that's really neat. I know we're winding down on time here. So I just want to make sure we have enough time so you can let our audience know. Do you have any updates, news, anything like that, or current projects that you can share with us?
Let's see, current projects. I'm currently on the writing side. I have a couple different series going, but right now I'm finishing, or I'm halfway through book 3 of a new series that takes place in the same world as the Warden's son.
Oh,
A
sweet.
character you do meet in that series, but I'm not going to tell you who. So that's been fun. I've never been so caught up in a world that I wanted to go back to it and write another series.
Oh,
And
that's
so this has
awesome.
been kind of a fun experience for me. So I'm working on that. And then I have a couple of others that are waiting their turn irritably. Um, and the the Silver Blood Raven series, that is coming out in audiobook. The first 2 books are out, and the third one I'm going over the last 5 chapters today, reviewing the last 5 chapters. So that one is almost fully out in audiobook.
Oh, cool.
And then I had my Forbidden Things being worked on in audiobook, but I lost my narrator, so I'm gonna have to
Oh,
try and fix that.
yep.
But I really want to get the Warden's son out in audiobook. I have to find a different narrator because the main character is male and I can't use a female narrator for that. So I'm shopping around for a narrator on that. And let's see, anything else. And I have a horror story I'm trying to send out to some magazines,
Oh,
um,
cool.
but it's dark and twisted, so we'll quiet about that. So yeah, I think that's everything I have going right now.
I'm like, one, two. That's a lot of stuff. I just want to point out to our audience, right, that excuse me, I'm so sorry. Book 4, Warden's Son, because this will be out by this weekend, so like November. I don't know why I can't talk today. My sinuses are going nuts. November 16th. So Throne of Vanris, book 4, right, is already out by this time,
Yeah.
correct? So just wanted to point that out to people. So feel free to be like me and just buy the whole thing before you get started.
Yes.
Everybody loves that. I'm horrible. I'll just do it. I'm like, oh, it sounds cool. But that's the thing about I always talk about on here. That's the first thing I'll go back and review with people, if I just know when I'm really gonna like a book series by now, particularly doing this podcast has really helped me to refine my taste. So like I have not been led astray by my new ability just to find authors that, I just just feel like a magnet towards, or their characters or world building, something like that. So this was one where I was like, boom, 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 boom. I had a gift card recently too, so I was like, yes. I just been on podcast people, which was really fun. It was like a twofer, I got stuff I wanted, got stuff that you guys wanted. But I just want to remind our audience that make sure you're reviewing all products, whether they're audio books, Kindle, whether it's our TV, our directors, our writers, our cast members for TV series and stuff. I got comic book artists and writers and, formatters, all sorts of people. We have some game people that are going to be on, Lit RPG and a bunch of other things, tabletop. So just please make sure everybody is reviewing those products because it helps everybody out, such as Nikki, and it just helps everybody involved in the process, whether it's cover artists, editors, things like that as well. So just want to remind our audience of that. You can find Nikki's her links and book and social in the description below. Anywhere where you're watching or listening to this podcast, please make sure you're sharing so that people will, get to hear this great interview that Nikki did. I'm just doing my normal thing, just being me, trying to, plug people in and connect people with characters and writers and creatives that you guys will enjoy. So any comments, please let us know. If you have any questions for Nikki, you can put them in the comment section, or you can actually send them direct to my email and I can connect you guys. But other than that, Nikki, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure. I got a lot going because I decided to write later this evening because when I have an interview like this, it just always spins my wheels ahead of time. So thank you already in advance because you had me thinking about a couple things in particular for my warm up, story. So I'm really, really excited to start book one of Warden's Son. But if there's anything else I can do in the meantime, there's the podcast group. You could send me anything and we'll post it, get it out there, and shout it from the rooftops per usual. That's why my neighbors called the cops the other day. I'm like, this book is great. But that's okay. That's what we're here for. But if there's anything else I could do for you, Nikki, you just let me know and I'll get the word out and help you as best I can. So
Thank you so much. It's been a whole lot of fun, and I have all these ideas going now too, so I'm going to go write.
mission accomplished. Well, Nikki, you have a great rest of the day. I know I'll talk to you, the next couple of days, on social media. I'll email you everything that we talked about earlier. And other than that, we'll be good to go. And I'm excited for this episode to release this Saturday. So thank you so much for coming on, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
You too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, not a problem. I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.